It's the guts and it's the glory. 100 stripes, 100 stories. It's the Pledge of Allegiance on the 4th of July. It's the handwritten letters from home. It's the sleepless nights alone. Newborn baby you left at your wife. It's the red, white, and blue. Lay down his life. It's the red, white, and blue. While these stars in the stripes. From the hills of Indiana, from the swamps of Louisiana, to the golden coast of California. Mr. Red, White, and Blue, lay down his life. Mr. Red, White, and Blue, while these stars in the stripes.
Battle on the Homefront TV. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. We got a phenomenal show. She is not a veteran, but she is a doctor doing amazing stuff for veterans and patriots alike on the Homefront. So, Dr. River.
Hello.
Hello. How are you? I'm good.
I'm doing great. Thank you and everybody else who's out there for your service, and thanks for having me on today.
Yeah.
Excited to finally have this chat. So. Yeah,
it's good. Brian facilitated this. Shout out to Brian Chandler. He arranged this. And I'm grateful for you're here. Grateful that you're here because it's a great conversation because a lot of what we do on Battle on the Homefront TV and even Battle on the Homefront, the Veteran Outreach Program, is dealing with natural medicine, and you're involved with that. So
Sure.
Please give us a little backstory and let's go from there.
Yeah, sure. So tell you a little bit about myself. So I am originally trained as an emergency physician, and I started getting interested in cannabis medicine, I want to say around 2016 or so, and then when cannabis became legal in Oklahoma, I started being a recommending physician then, and so I was a medical director at a facility that did primarily recommendations for 2 years, just over 2 years, I think, and yeah, have tried to stay active with that. We saw, I think, somewhere with the clinic close to 7,000 patients.
Wow. How many veterans?
I would say somewhere between 40 and 50% of those were veterans.
Really?
So yeah.
Wow.
So we had a really large patient population of vets, and actually from there I worked at the VA for a little while. I like working with the veteran population, and so I've gotten a chance to do that, which has been fun, and so I'm thankful for all the vets that we got to meet, and hopefully helped. So
what made you go from you're just a doctor, and what made you jump to the cannabis side of things or natural medicine in that sense, and what was that like?
Sure. Well, so I have, there's a little bit in my background, I guess. I also have training in public health, so I have my master in public health as well as my MD. And then I also am board certified in lifestyle medicine in addition to emergency medicine. So
what is lifestyle medicine?
Yeah, I know it's not many people have heard of it, right? Yeah, so it focuses on using what you do in your everyday life as your medicine. So instead of pharmaceuticals, using diet, exercise, social support, sleep, wellness, and kind of trying to find things that work for you in your everyday life as opposed to just prescribing a bunch of medications for things. That. Yeah, it's great. It's really great. And so, because there's tons of stuff we do every day that affect our health, right? By the time you get to the hospital, maybe 10% of your health is really taken care of at a healthcare facility. The rest of it is what you do on a regular basis, right? So I guess I kind of have a background in that's more the way I think about medicine globally. But then also, as an emergency physician, I have worked at a couple big facilities, and I also practice in Oregon. And so I made the transition from Arizona, where at the time cannabis was not legal, to Oregon, where cannabis was legal.
And everywhere.
And everywhere, yes, and absolutely everywhere, even more so now. Mm-hmm. But noticed that my patients' medication lists were much, much smaller in Oregon. And then I made the transition from Oregon to Oklahoma, where my patients' medication lists were absolutely astronomical. And in working in the emergency department, I see the ramifications of that too, right? The medication overdoses, the medication side effects, people who are withdrawing from medications, and you don't really see a lot of that with cannabis. And so the move from Oregon to Oklahoma was really what triggered my interest in cannabis. And then I went on to do, I did some training at the Medical Cannabis Institute, did some additional work with the Society of Cannabis Clinicians, and really, I guess, just took it upon myself to educate myself as much as I can. I was actually reading a statistic the other day that I thought was interesting. So as of 2014, only 14% of medical schools touch on the endocannabinoid system or cannabis really at all. I was not in that 14%. In medical school, it was illegal, and that was kind of it, right?
Taboo.
Yeah, exactly. We don't talk about it. We don't learn about it in pharmacology. We don't learn, you just don't learn about it, right? It's just a drug of abuse and away it goes. And so it was, fascinating to find all of the different medicinal uses it has, but also, how much research is now ongoing about the endocannabinoid system and, really how cannabis works. And I think I appreciated then, how misunderstood it is from, I think, a practitioner perspective, but then also, a consumer perspective. And it's a really interesting field, I think.
It's amazing. And I truly believe, without a doubt, if you look at the last 100 years of sickness that we've experienced, it all really starts when the war on drugs started, right? The marijuana,
right.
reefer madness and all that.
Yeah.
And even when you go as far back from the beginning of time, right? But we always had hemp. And we were getting cannabinoids in multiple different ways. Our livestock was eating it, and I think as a society we've gotten sick because we were lied to by our government and the DuPonts and the paper mill and that whole ordeal,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, it's a very political thing, right? Right now cannabis is considered a Schedule 1 substance, and in order to be a Schedule 1 substance, it has to have no proven medicinal therapeutic benefit.
Crazy.
Now, that you can say that methamphetamine is a Schedule 2, and as a physician,
Adderall.
I can legally prescribe that to folks if I'd like. And it just blows my mind for a substance that has so many potential therapeutic options and so really, relatively little side effect and downside that it's still considered that way. It can only be political and business driven, right?
100%.
It certainly wasn't a medicinal. The American Medical Association, when cannabis became illegal, was opposed to that, and still, has maintained a fairly, open mind to cannabis as a therapeutic. But it's not really. It's much more political than science based, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think now that they're obviously a big pharma knows that it can't keep it.
Sure.
They're going to want their money now. And what blows
Right.
my mind, right, is even CBD, Epidiolex, which is a synthetic cannabinoid made by and approved by the FDA.
A very expensive one, yes.
Oh, very expensive.
Very expensive
But
one.
you know what I mean? That shows you right there. But they synthesized it. It's not even from what God put on this earth, from an actual plant.
Sure.
So there's always going to be greed. It all stemmed from that from the beginning.
Sure.
But I think it's opening so many eyes, and I think people just in general. Me myself, I went through the whole opiate addiction and ruined my life without a doubt.
Sure.
And so, you're seeing so many of these success stories of people that switched over, to cannabis and can go
Absolutely.
get it and getting help, and it's crazy.
Well, and I think it's crazy to me too that we consider cannabis. When I started doing the cannabis recommendations, it was a huge learning curve, right? Because there's not really a body of practitioners out there. Nobody had done it before in Oklahoma, right? And so I think cannabis is kind of, has been very stigmatized and is sort of, oh, you can't use cannabis in opioids, or, oh, you can't use cannabis in other things, or, oh, you can't, there was for a little while, I don't know if you remember this, you can't use cannabis and own a gun, and,
Yeah, that was...
and they're just all of this ridiculous madness.
That was more of uneducated people, and just not knowing.
Right.
That's all
Well,
that
and
is.
that's the thing, and I think there's just a huge percentage of what goes on with cannabis is not knowing, and honestly, a lot of it is the scientific community and physicians. I mean, I think I saw a lot of folks who came to me after having spoke with their physician, which is the appropriate first thing to do. Who their physicians would say it's the devil's lettuce, or it's that it does absolutely nothing, or that it's going to make you crazy, and it there's like, can people have side effects with it? Sure, if they don't use the correct product, or if they use too much, or for certain conditions. But I mean, really, by and large, compared to a lot of the pharmaceutical medications we have, cannabis is extraordinarily safe. It can be extremely effective, and people just have to understand how to use it. So yeah, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there, and I appreciate you helping educate folks about some of those things.
For sure. We're gonna go on a quick break. Hey, y'all check out our sponsors.
This is Brian Prater, owner of Prater Roofing and Construction. Guys, listen, we're out here servicing Oklahoma and surrounding states. Definitely want to pay tribute to the men and women that fought for this country, any patriots. We service everybody. You can reach us at 405-334-7708, and we'd love to come to work for you. Thank you.
Battle on the Homefront TV, we're back. Make sure you subscribe here with Dr. River. And we were just talking about, obviously, cannabis, right? And I think it's important for people, quality of products, very important. And we were talking about side effects and things like that with cannabis. Did you hear, or do you remember, because I do remember, of a lot of people getting sick. And they were getting sick because these growers were using neem oil on their plants in flower. And so there was all kinds of people going to the hospital. And so I definitely think that, from the grower, and that's an important factor in all this as well.
Well, it is. And one of the challenges that it really faced when we first started doing the recommendations here was being able to get a consistent quality product was really hard for patients, right? And so, exactly as it indicate the neem oil or what growers put on the product, but then what's in the product. And I think one of the cool things about cannabis that really gives people a chance to sort of have power over their medication is you can control your medication, right? You can grow your medication, you can dose your medication, and certainly finding somebody to help you with that process if you're not familiar is important. But yeah, absolutely, what goes on your product and what goes into your body, I mean, it's all important, right? And I think having an understanding of that and not just whatever you can get your hands on is really truly important, because I mean, people can have really bad reactions to things, and it's not, you wouldn't go just take a handful of pills that you didn't know what they were and hope that turned out okay, or at least I hope not, right? And I think there's definitely people and products out there that can help pretty much anyone, with whatever they, whether it's pain, whether it's anxiety, whether it's sleep, but you have to know what product you're using, and you have to know, what has gone into that product. So yeah, I mean, I think, finding a good quality grower or producer, or, maybe growing your own are good options.
For sure. And I definitely think it's a good idea. I mean, yes, anybody can put a seed in the ground and it'll pump out a plant, and that's very possible. But
well, mostly, yeah.
Some people do. I know some people that are just not growers. I am blessed, and I can just put something in the ground and it flourishes. But and it is important for cannabinoid content. Terpene profile is important. And when you get into somebody that's already dealing with a tremendous amount of mental health, me for instance, I deal with a copious amount of mental health that I battle, and so. If I smoked a high THC live resin, that's, shout out to my brother, Giddy. He's actually the one that created live resin in 2013. But anyways, live resin, all those things like that. they throw me off. They're
Sure.
not. It's not. There's definitely a difference between a Band-Aid and medicine.
Sure.
You know, and you get into the Band-Aids, right? And I'm great with it. We just said it earlier. You know, if you need a Band-Aid because you're trying to drink a fifth of Jack like I used to,
Sure.
right? If you're gonna get jacked up, smoke some high tea. You know what I mean? Party, right? But when you get in the medicinal side, I think ratios, terpene profiles are important.
Sure.
What's your ideas on those?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the biggest things, you know, it's when somebody comes to chat with me about cannabis, I mean, whether or not it would be a good thing for you or not usually isn't a huge part of the conversation. The bigger part of the conversation is, okay, now if this is something we're going to try, how do we approach it, right? And so as a consumer, that can be really difficult. I think primarily because a lot of high THC content is how cannabis has been grown recently. So the cannabis that's available largely in the United States has been focused to a recreational market. Well, that recreational market is 28, 30, 32% THC, you know, as you said, how high can you get, right? Well, that's not really necessarily what we're going for. So will it help with your pain? Maybe. Will it help you sleep? Probably to some degree, but it's not going to work nearly as well as it does when you have nice complementary CBD, a good terpene profile with it. Got my words confused there. And when you really start to understand what you need. And so I think Brian and I were talking the other day. I don't like using this analogy necessarily because I think cannabis is far healthier for you than alcohol. Sure. But I think it's one that people can appreciate. So, you know, with alcohol, you know, you have you have your glass of wine that you might have half a glass of wine at dinner, or you can have a bottle of Everclear, or you can drink your fifth of Jack, right? Mm-hmm. And so in my mind, that 30% THC without any CBD is kind of more that fifth of Jack,
sure.
and so I think, you know, you're not going to start into alcohol with that necessarily, but I think that's what a lot of people do with cannabis. And I think, one, they either have a bad experience, two, they are so mentally impaired by the product that it's difficult to function otherwise. And I think that's why a lot of people struggle with THC, or maybe just use it on the weekends, or, you know, what have you, is because they don't want to be impaired doing what they're doing. But you don't have to be impaired and use cannabis. Those are two completely different things. You just have to understand what product you're using. And so the products that do tend to have a little bit higher CBD profile, lower THC content, I'll talk to a lot of my patients actually who have kind of refound cannabis, who maybe used it back in the 60s and 70s and liked it but stopped using it for careers, family, whatever, you know, and have kind of come back to it because they're having arthritis issues or sleep troubles or whatever, and liked the stuff that they used to use a lot better because that stuff was usually somewhere in the 3 to 6% THC content and had more CBD, and the stuff that's being grown now is just considerably more potent, largely, not everything, but people have to really be aware of that because it does make a huge difference in your experience and the symptom relief that you get and the sort of side effects that you're going to get as well.
Yeah, like when you're talking about the older 60s and 70s, that's back when they had like the brickweed, right? And so shout out to my brother Ryan Early. He just created Sapphire, which is a brand, but we use CBN, which is a degradation of Delta-9, converts into cannabinol, which is like the sedative for sleep, and they're doing great with that. But I remember the old brickweed always making me sleepy back in the days because it was degraded, like, you know what I mean? It's been in the back of a semi, probably coming from another country. But
very possible. Very possible.
So, and you seen the COAs the other day, and so IGY6, and not just this strain. We have an alpha and a bravo in the IGY6. One's at 2-to-1 THC CBD. Okay. And then the other one is a 2-to-1 CBD THC. Perfect blend, true medicine, right? Like that's what we were talking about. Like, you know, you're not, you know, when you're smoking 30%, it's going to be hard to get homeostasis.
Sure.
You know, like.
Right. Well, and so cannabis is such a balancing medication. I think that's what's so fascinating, right? I actually, if I can, I'm
you absolutely
perpetually the book nerd.
You're the guest. You can do it.
Well, no, because I had sticky noted this because I thought it was great. So the endocannabinoid system activity may have therapeutic potential in almost all diseases affecting humans, including obesity, metabolic syndrome, diabetes and diabetic complications, neurodegeneration, inflammatory, cardiovascular, liver, gastrointestinal, skin diseases, pain, psychiatric disorders, cachexia, cancer, gastrointestinal, skin diseases, chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, and many others. So there's tons and tons, right? And the reason for that is because it's a very balancing medicine. So you don't want something that's all THC and no CBD, but you also don't really necessarily get as good of effects with all CBD and no THC either. You know, you really need that the entourage effect. I don't know if you've talked about that much at all, but really I think it's 421 different chemical compounds that they've found in cannabis, over 100 which are phytocannabinoids. And so, you know, there's all sorts of stuff in there that helps it work. And I'm a big believer that nature probably knows better than our pharmaceutical manufacturers what your body needs.
I say
right?
God was the best pharmacist.
There
all
you
the
go.
time.
Yeah. And, you know, I think unfortunately, medicine, in at least Western medicine right now, has gone towards single molecular medications because that's what we can study, right? And so when you do head-to-head trials and the FDA approves these things, they're looking at molecule versus molecule. Well, you can't really do that with cannabis. And so all the studies that have been done, or the grand majority of them, have been done only on THC. Well, no, you're not going to get nearly as good a benefit only on THC as you are on IGY6, for example. You know, you're just not going to get that. And I think it's one of the very beneficial things about cannabis, but also one of the things that makes it a little tricky at the legality standpoint.
Without a doubt. We're going to go on a quick commercial break. Check out our sponsors. Battle on the Homefront TV here with Dr. River. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and then that way they can kind of understand. I want people to. There's so much like big words that scares people, right? Endocannabinoid system and entourage effect and homeostasis and things like that. So let's kind of help the audience understand some of those words and what they mean and what they're doing. So
sure. So the endocannabinoid system is a really cool system in your body. So your body uses all sorts of different ways to communicate, and so different systems within your body do different things. And so the endocannabinoid system is a system that communicates using endocannabinoids. And so there's all sorts of receptors on different parts of your body. So your brain, your gut, your liver, almost every part of your body has receptors that respond to endocannabinoids. And endocannabinoids are just molecules that your body produces. And so it helps the endocannabinoid system, we really think, largely helps keep homeostasis or helps keep balance in your body. So, you know, it's interesting. So people will, say, well, won't cannabis make me gain weight, or won't cannabis, it makes me lose weight. It actually helps you balance. So it can help people who are underweight or overweight. It can help, folks who are having trouble sleeping or have people who are sleeping too much. It can really, it's interesting in that way because not a lot of things work in that way. And so when we say that cannabis is has endocannabinoid properties, or it's a phytocannabinoid, it just means that it's activating those receptors or affecting those molecules. Yeah. But yeah, the endocannabinoid system, I don't know if we have enough time to talk. I mean, it really is. It's got receptors in your entire body.
Yeah, and the way I best describe it to a lot of people is like a lock and key.
Yep.
I think that's I break it down like Barney's talking.
I think that's a really good analogy. It's a good analogy. I think so. Yeah.
And so and they're like, CBD and or the plant in general, right? Oh, well, you say it helps everything. Well, it's your ECS is your master regulatory system, so it's going to help you, but it can get very confusing, and honestly, it's always like, before I started doing, getting into it so much though, I was like addicted to learning about it. And what's crazy is the ECS, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was only discovered in 1996, correct?
It's been very recent. I don't remember
Yeah.
the exact year, but yeah, it's been relatively recent. And so that's the other thing too, is it's not just, there's so much to learn because there's so much being published every day and there's so much coming out. Israel's doing a lot of research. There's little pockets around the world, but again, here in the US, it's tricky because it's still federally illegal, right? So the actual research that you can do on the actual plant is still tricky. So as one of the most, therapeutics things that we found that activates the endocannabinoid system, we haven't been able to do a lot of research on it, but it's coming. I think it's definitely coming. And I think as we go forward, we're only going to understand more and more about how much the endocannabinoid system really does.
Yeah. Did we tell them what homeostasis is?
So it's just maintaining balance, more so than anything, so different conditions. So some of the different conditions that, we tend to see veterans for a lot in the clinic would be pain, for example. Okay. So if your pain receptors are not in a homeostatic balance, right, then you are going to be having abnormal responses to pain. So whether that's acute pain, chronic pain, exacerbations of chronic pain, your ability to sense and interpret pain isn't in homeostasis. And so our goal is to help achieve that. So to balance, not to completely take away, any and all pain, but to make it balanced in your body and to, take away that component that has become abnormal. Did I describe that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Phenomenal.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so pain is one of those, a variety of mental health conditions, and PTSD is a huge one for vets. And there's not a lot of medications, honestly, that work great for PTSD. There really aren't.
Pharmaceuticals for me they make, if I take antidepressants, obviously I'm a recovering addict, so I can't take benzos. I can't go down that road.
Sure.
But I get more suicidal on antidepressants and SSRIs and all those. But.
Well, and that's not uncommon. I mean, with PTSD, a lot of it is the hyperreactivity, the abnormal dreams, that really kind of always psychomotor agitation, sort of on the edge. And so the homeostatic balance for PTSD, that sort of helps bring it back. It helps with sleep a lot because it takes away the components of REM sleep and introduces more stage 3 deep sleep. So it helps with sleep quality, but then it also helps with some of that hyperreactivity, the abnormal fear response. I mean, it just brings that response that's sort of hyperacute back into balance. So again, the homeostasis concept.
So high THC is not going to be good.
Probably not.
High THC takes away REM sleep, correct?
It does, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, so there's a variety of things. I mean, most of the time, if you're suffering from something, whatever that is, whether that's anxiety, insomnia, pain, it's because something's out of balance, right? And so the really cool thing about cannabis is, as you said, with it acts as a master key. It kind of helps bring all of that back into balance, and then you can work on stuff much easier when you're not hurting all the time, and when you're not anxious about things, and when you're sleeping properly. Then you can kind of start to go and focus on the other stuff that you want to do. And the other thing too, I don't know if people are. I feel like the word overdose gets kind of thrown around with cannabis and stuff, and it's a completely different. You really can't physiologically overdose on cannabis, and I think that's important for people to know. I think that's misinterpreted a lot. I've actually heard some physicians misinterpret it, but with opiates, right? There's opiate receptors in your brainstem, and so people really can physiologically. I mean, that's the opiate crisis and folks passing away from that. But with cannabis, I mean, there aren't any cannabinoid receptors in the brainstem, so we're not going to have those issues with respiratory depression and stuff the way that you do with opiates. So, it's a lot of veterans do tend to struggle with suicidal thoughts or, patterns, and it's a huge epidemic in our society, really. And, so if people are looking for a safe option and still need help, it oftentimes tend to be better than some of the pharmaceuticals that we see.
Yeah, there's a lot of natural alternatives that I'd like to see. I know we're here with cannabis. It's in motion. People are seeing the results. They know it's helping. Even with, my brother started Can-Tek Labs in 2016. Custom compounding, CBD, CBG, CBN,
Sure.
Doing phenomenal work, and it saved so many people. And we see the aspects of hemp or cannabis happening. But I want to see natural alternatives. I'd like to see kratom getting addressed and what it's doing, and I'd like to see research into that too, because I think that's a touchy subject too, because I think there's some dependency issues with kratom.
Yeah, all my experience with kratom is just anecdotal from what my patients have said. I've not ever been able to find great research on it, so I'm not really sure how to, cannabis definitely, there's a lot of strong physiologic backing. Kratom, I'm just not sure is quite there
I'm not
yet.
either. I just, as in terms of natural alternatives, I would just love to see more light shown on these issues that we're already dealing with. And another one that I'm going to spearhead, I think, this year, which would be psilocybin for legislation to help with that. I'm a big believer in psilocybin as well.
Yep, no, I agree. I think it's got definitely some therapeutic potential there, and they're actually coming out with some good MDMA-assisted studies with PTSD too. So
ketamine as well. I had a show on here a couple shows ago with Jude McCullough from Southern Stem Cell and Stem Cell Replacements, and they're doing some ketamine treatments down there for PTSD. Obviously, I think ketamine's more natural alternative, or MDMA, right? But but you're talking about small treatment, and resetting or whatever. But
and not having to be on these medications every day, because that's one thing I'll tell you from working at the VA is folks come in and folks come in.
You done did it now. You broke it.
I know. I just slapped it around.
Show's over.
It's just ruined it. But folks come in and they're these folks who just want to feel normal and be able to function, but they're on these med lists that are 12, 15 meds long, and why? We don't need that. People need therapeutic options, but why not use one thing that works for a whole host of things as opposed to all these different pills for all these different things, right? Because then you have your SSRI, but then maybe that gives you insomnia and you can't sleep. So now you're taking a pill for sleep, and then you're taking something for your anxiety, and you're taking a benzo.
But that's giving you diarrhea, so you got to take something for that, and it doesn't stop.
Yeah, and it just compounds. So it's every time you have a side effect from one, you're just being put on a pill for another. And I think that's one of the big things we really saw from vets when we saw them in the clinic was just a desire to not want to be on all this stuff, and just find some, real help. So I think it's awesome that you're talking about it.
Hey, we're going to take another commercial break. Check out our sponsors. Anyway, so why do you think a lot more doctors, and I think we kind of have an idea, right? But why are doctors not getting behind like what you did? I think it takes a lot. And shout out to Dr. Brandon Bailey. He's actually, you know him?
I do.
That's my buddy.
Good deal.
I love Dr. Brandon Bailey. He's a phenomenal guy. I can't say enough. He's a big supporter for Battle on the Homefront. And presented us a check and to help us with therapy programs at one of his fights, which he was victorious at. And my throat hurt for 4 days because I ain't never wanted someone to win so much as I did that night, and he won. I was super grateful.
That's awesome.
Well, that's great. Y'all know each other.
Yeah, well, so we've interacted a little bit just from the cannabis recommendation. So yeah, unfortunately, there's not a tremendous number of physicians who do recommendations who it's tricky, right, from a physician standpoint, because there's some disincentives to doing it. So first, your education, right? So if it's only 14% of medical schools even talk about cannabis or the endocannabinoid system, you're uneducated about it, right? Which is kind of a weird dark spot for physicians, right? Because we're used to feeling like we're pretty adept at stuff. And then you from just a practical standpoint, cannabis is still technically illegal to prescribe, so we have to recommend it, right? So it's because it's federally illegal and because it's an FDA Schedule 1. So I hold a license, correct? And so in order to hold my license to prescribe other things, I can't prescribe anything that's Schedule 1. Okay, so then I can recommend it, but it gets dicey in there, the way that it talks about it, just legally and things. So there's some disincentive there from the system. And then also, just from a systems standpoint, a lot of systems are intimidated to go out there because they receive federal funding, right? So the majority of hospitals, the majority of hospital systems receive federal funding. So they can't do anything that's federally illegal and still receive federal funding. And so if you're somebody who the majority of physicians work for a institution that receives federal funding, then you can't recommend cannabis unless there are a few institutions that have found ways around that. But it becomes really challenging from a professional side and from an educational side. The educational side you can overcome, obviously, and there's different ways to be able to do that. If there's any physicians out there, the Medicinal Cannabis Institute is a good one. But there's some just barriers, I guess, there to doing that. And so unfortunately what that means is you either can't find a provider. You can find a provider, but they're not terribly educated about cannabis. We did that a lot, actually, in the clinic, is we would see folks for what we called educational visits, where they actually had gotten their recommendation from another provider, but the provider had no idea how to recommend actually using cannabis. And so we would see people and just help through that process. Or you have folks that maybe are, doing it for reasons that aren't completely altruistic, right? You have folks that don't know a whole lot about it and are writing, 250 recommendations a day and just signing their name and going through and, checking patients off. And that's not what you want as a patient either, right? And so to find good quality physicians doing this, there's a number of barriers there within the system, and then there's just the stigma about it too, right? I think we all kind of grew up in an era that we're hopefully getting out of, where there was this say no to drugs kind of thing, and this is a drug. And it's interesting. At almost every physicians convention you go to, we're all sitting there with a big cup of coffee, right? We all have our cups of coffee.
Barrage coffee?
Barrage coffee?
Y'all
yes,
need it.
We're all sitting there with our Barrage coffee, yes. So coffee has been consistently found, and there's multiple studies that have done this, to be more addictive than cannabis, and we're all sitting there talking about, physicians are debating, people becoming addicted to cannabis, where studies have consistently shown that the thing that we're all consuming right now is actually more addictive than cannabis. And so, I think it's just getting over that stigma and actually understanding, what are we working with here practically, from a side effects and benefits and therapeutic standpoint. And like you said, you can learn about it forever. There's all sorts of information out there and all sorts coming out every day. So I think this conversation 10 years from now would be a lot different than it will be 20 years from now. And gosh, I hope it's different, right? At least
that's why I love Dr. Brandon Bailey. He owns Evolve Health and Wellness, and he does every single night. If y'all ain't checked out Dr. Brandon Bailey, go check it out. He does just the most phenomenal education that you possibly can get on his shows, and that's why he's truly trying to get people to understand it. And he goes into, terpene profile for whatever, you know what I mean? He goes deep into it.
Sure.
And I think that's important too, and I could imagine the stigma with other doctors as well, especially the older doctors that are just like that's been that's horrible, and all they've done their whole career was prescribe every opiate possible,
right,
and destroy lives,
right.
And to see doctors that are truly, it fills my heart, I'll be honest with you. There has to be some kind of a break, and there has to be,
I agree.
There has to be doctors that want to care, because I know how many doctors ruined my life, that I didn't have nothing wrong with me, and he said, "Is your shoulder's messed up?" It moved my shoulder, and he wrote me 120 Lortabtins. Oh, well, you need some Xanax bars with that, and I remember I wasn't even going there for that.
Sure.
He was writing that, and my life was tore up from that, and
yeah.
I think it's important to see that there are doctors that truly care, that are trying to find natural alternatives, and care about the patients. Y'all took an oath. You take an oath. The same as my brothers and sisters that fought for this country took an oath. And I think a lot of doctors are bullshit, and they don't go with that oath, and they don't believe in that oath, and they hurt more people than they help. And to see doctors like you and Dr. Brandon Bailey that truly care about the patriots and veterans here on the Homefront is a beautiful thing. So I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart.
No,
so.
Absolutely, and thanks for sharing that. It is unfortunate that I think there's things that are easy and there's things that are a little more difficult, right? And I think it's easy to sit there and sign your prescription pad all day and not really think about it, and these are going to get me good satisfaction scores and whatever, but not really understand what the ramifications ramifications of that are. I mean, with your, experience that you described, there's so many other options. And I really hope that, at some point, medicine in general becomes much more open to that, but that more physicians will consider, kind of branching out and consider what really is ultimately in the overall trajectory of their patient's life helping. Because, I mean, a pill for this and then a pill for that and then a pill for this, like you said, it's not really at the end of the day getting to the crux of things. And, there are so many things. I mean, just thank you. And to those of you who are watching who are vets, thank you for you guys doing what you do so that we can do what we do. But I think there's a mutual accountability there, right? I mean, you guys have fought and protected our ability to be able to, perform that oath that I have taken, right? So, I mean, I need to step up and respect, my do no harm, my, doing my best for my patients. And I think it's, maybe easy to forget that. I don't know. I don't know what the reasoning is. I think there's a lot in medicine right now that kind of disconnects patients and their providers. I think COVID's made that particularly more difficult because you actually don't even get to see your provider oftentimes. But I think there's an obligation for us in medicine to always keep an open mind and to always explore different options that would work for patients. And I think it's really unfortunate if people aren't open to whatever those options are. And we're always going to that's going to evolve, right? What I maybe see as the best therapy for one thing now might be different in 10 years, but that's okay, right? That's how we evolve and that's how we grow. And
you only do the best you can do.
Right. Well, and I appreciate what you're doing, in going out there and helping, create new strains, new products, and trying things, because I mean, really, ultimately, that's how we figure out what's going to work out best for us is just kind of stepping along like that. So I think it's a cannabis. It's a cool time in cannabis right now, and I think I think it's neat from I think there's a lot of promise there for patients that are looking for some help. So hopefully, if folks are interested in trying it, they can. It sounds like you guys have a lot of resources that they can access. So
absolutely, yeah. And I think this is the way to not only end. I don't think there's 22 veterans a day that commit suicide. You know that.
Yeah.
But there's 30 veterans a day that die from pharmaceutical abuse, and I think a lot of the 22 is because of the 30 that's getting there. Because I know a lot of because I've had suicide attempts, and so I think I was there at the suicide attempts because I was already so out into addiction. Sure. Obviously, I was battling mental health as well. So I think if we combat one, we combat the other, and if we take that number down by just one person every year, we're winning. So again, I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
You're amazing. I hope you're a world traveler. So next time you get back in here, we got to get you on the show again, and
let's do it.
I'd love to. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, thank you all for watching Battle on the Homefront TV. Make sure you subscribe, and I want to say a big thank you to my sponsors that helped me on this show. Have a good day.
It's the guts and it's the glory. 100 stripes, 100 stories. It's the pledge of allegiance on the 4th of July. It's the handwritten letters from home. It's the sleepless nights alone. The newborn baby you left at your wife. It's the red, white, and blue. Lay down his life. It's the red, white, and blue. While these stars and the stripes. From the hills of Indiana, from the swamps of Louisiana, to the golden coast of California. Mr. Red, White, and Blue, lay down